The atmosphere inside the magnificent temple at Bethel was thick with expensive incense and the underlying tension of an empire at the peak of its glory. Priests draped in splendid robes woven with gold thread strode majestically among the smoking altars. Outside the vast courtyard paved with beautiful marble was the noisy haggling of merchants raking in massive profits. Melodious music from stringed instruments echoed from deep within the sanctuary, creating a perfect picture of prosperity and blessing that everyone desired. But then a strange figure suddenly walked through the massive gates, completely shattering that flawless picture. The thick dust of the arid wilderness still clung tightly to his rough, coarse-woven wool tunic. His calloused, rough hands had never touched jeweled golden cups or picked up the pen of the elite. The pungent smell of sheep and wild desert wind radiated from him, causing the surrounding nobles to wrinkle their noses and step back. He did not bow submissively before the high priest standing majestically on the elevated platform. Nor did he bother to wait for the permission of any authority figure to speak. His rough yet thunderous voice tore through the soothing religious facade like a sharp knife slicing through sheepskin. He boldly declared that the Almighty would never tolerate the heinous crimes taking place right beneath this veneer of prosperity. The entire massive room suddenly plunged into a dead silence so deep that one could hear a drop of sweat hitting the stone floor. Everyone was completely bewildered, wondering who this rustic man was and where he came from to utter words that sounded like a brutal death sentence. He was Amos, a nobody shepherd from the barren lands of the southern kingdom of Judah. He had never set foot in any prestigious prophetic training schools of the era. He was just a poor farmer who struggled daily with wild sycamore figs in the lowlands to earn a meager living. In the eyes of those holding power and wealth in that room, Amos was absolutely someone of no value. However, when the Creator called, that nameless man became an earthquake that shook the entire foundation of a kingdom. His appearance was a fatal slap to human pride, reminding us that the Almighty never looks for polished resumes. He only looks for brave hearts ready to utter a voice of unconditional obedience. 12 miles south of the capital Jerusalem was the small village of Tekoa, perched on the edge of a harsh wilderness. This was absolutely not a place that kings or high-ranking wise men would ever visit. There were no magnificent palaces or bustling markets overflowing with fine silk and brocade here. There were only bare rocky hills, scrawny flocks of sheep, and farmers working the harsh earth from dawn to dusk. Amos lived a quiet and monotonous life among the poor shepherds in this forgotten land. Shepherding in ancient Israel meant long, dragging days exposed to the scorching heat of the desert. It meant sleepless nights staring wide-eyed, on high alert against fierce beasts lurking in the dark. It meant fitful sleep on the cold ground with his only possession being a crude wooden staff to protect himself. The task of puncturing sweet figs to ripen them evenly was heavy manual labor that bent his back and darkened his skin. Amos had absolutely no connection to religious institutions or the powerful families ruling the country. According to ordinary human logic, he was the absolute last candidate the Almighty could choose to deliver a message of national magnitude. But divine history has proven time and again that heaven's choices always humiliate earthly wisdom. He once sent a fugitive named Moses to confront the most powerful pharaoh in the world. He once chose the youngest shepherd boy named David to defeat an invincible giant. He once called illiterate fishermen with no theological knowledge to become apostles who changed humanity. And now, he reached out from the magnificent sanctuaries to call a shepherd reeking of mud to challenge a nation sleeping in illusion. Truth does not need speakers with smooth eloquence, truth only needs people who do not fear death. The Bible records no burning bush or dazzling vision when that sacred call came to Amos. The Almighty simply plucked him from his familiar flock and placed a mission as heavy as a mountain into his hands. He ordered him to head north, stepping directly into the center of power of the kingdom of Israel to prophesy. This was not an adventure seeking fame, but a death sentence hanging over the head of an outsider. Judah and Israel were two kingdoms in a state of bitter hostility, always looking at each other with deep suspicion. A dirt-poor shepherd from the south coming to lecture the wealthy in the north was an unforgivable insult. Especially since this event took place during the reign of King Jeroboam II, the most brilliantly golden era in Israel's history. Successive military victories had expanded the kingdom's borders further than ever before. Bustling trade routes brought in countless gold and jewels that filled the king's storehouses. Every social class was enthusiastically enjoying lavish parties, believing they were absolutely favored by the divine. But behind that velvet curtain, the keen eyes of the Creator saw through the disgusting rot eating away the marrow of an entire nation. He saw courtrooms where judges draped in black robes casually sold justice cheaply to the highest bidder. He saw fat merchants smiling ruthlessly as they trampled on the lives of the poor to scrape together a few extra coins. He saw noisy religious festivals where people sang hymns with deceitful mouths and hearts as cold as ice. This entire country was like a beautifully plump apple on the outside, but inside it was rotten and full of maggots. Therefore, the Almighty sent a farmer who clearly understood the value of every drop of sweat and the bitterness of oppression to be his spokesperson. A man who had never learned to twist his tongue or use empty words to curry favor with those in power. The command was issued with absolute clarity, allowing no room for any evasion. Amos trudged silently along the dusty road heading north, leaving his bewildered flock of sheep behind. Perhaps his rough hands trembled with fear when thinking of the colossal forces he was about to face. But absolute obedience transformed a timid shepherd into heaven's fiercest warrior. Amos's rhetorical strategy when facing the crowd at Bethel was a masterpiece of mass psychology. He began by boldly declaring devastating verdicts raining down upon the hostile nations surrounding Israel. He cursed Damascus for brutal war crimes and condemned Gaza for inhuman slave trading. He criticized Tyre for tearing up sacred treaties and condemned Moab for desecrating the corpses of the dead. The Israelite crowd below clapped thunderously, nodding in smug satisfaction and cheering enthusiastically for this strange prophet. They joyfully believed that finally, someone dared to speak the voice of justice to punish their despicable enemies. Then Amos suddenly turned his spear toward his own homeland of Judah, condemning them for turning their backs on divine law. The northern audience might have felt slightly uneasy but still breathed a sigh of relief because at least the sword of judgment had not yet touched their necks. And then, when the crowd was at their most unguarded, the massive sledgehammer of truth slammed directly onto the heads of the entire Israelite elite. Amos's voice rang out like a thunderbolt tearing the sky, exposing the crime of selling out innocent people for a mere pair of tattered straw sandals. He accused the elite of ruthlessly trampling on the heads of the destitute like stepping on the dirt under their boot heels. He described the disgusting scenes where the wealthy used the power of money to choke justice and push poor families into eternal slavery. They casually held sacred religious ceremonies on the very cloaks they had cruelly exacted as pledges from starving farmers. The prosperity this kingdom proudly boasted about was actually built on the blood, tears, and skulls of the vulnerable classes. Not stopping there, Amos continued to point his sharp spear at the fat aristocratic women living in luxury in the capital city of Samaria. He called them the fat cows of Bashan, those who only knew how to indulge and order their husbands to exploit the poor to fund their lavish lifestyles. The noble women draped in fine silk were stunned and trembling with rage at being made a laughingstock in public by a filthy shepherd. But in the eyes of absolute judgment, brilliant expensive clothes could not hide the ultimate ugliness of cruel souls. The wrath of heaven erupted to its peak when Amos conveyed the Creator's utter disgust toward their empty religious rituals. He flatly declared that he hated and despised their noisy, hypocritical festivals to the bone. He refused to smell their expensive incense, violently rejected their fattened offerings, and plugged his ears against their skillful hymn music. Because a religion detached from justice and compassion is nothing but deafening noise that makes heaven nauseous. The Almighty does not need flashy performative rituals. He demands that justice must roll on like a mighty, never-failing river. Amos's prophetic storm finally ignited a fiery direct confrontation at the very religious center of Bethel. The high priest Amaziah glared at Amos with eyes burning with hatred because his position of power was severely threatened. He immediately sent an urgent secret letter to King Jeroboam II, accusing Amos of raising a conspiracy in the heart of the kingdom. Amaziah distorted the sacred message of the Creator into treasonous political rhetoric to use earthly power to silence the voice of truth. He loudly proclaimed that the land could not bear or tolerate the ominous prophecies of this southern shepherd. When realizing they cannot refute the truth, those in power always choose to launch a direct attack on the messenger. Amaziah aggressively marched up to Amos, insulting him and telling him to get out and return to the poor land of Judah. He challenged Amos to go back to his homeland to earn his bread by prophesying and never return to Bethel to cause trouble. Amaziah arrogantly declared that Bethel was the king's sanctuary and the central temple of a glorious dynasty. But he forgot that a temple serving politics and human comfort is no longer the house of the Almighty. Standing before the threats of religious authority and royal power, the shepherd Amos stood as firm as a rock amidst raging waves. He did not tremble at all, boldly asserting that he was not a professional prophet making money off people's faith. He was just a shepherd and a poor caretaker of wild sycamore figs in the desolate wilderness. The Creator himself had plucked him from his flock and ordered him to prophesy to the straying nation of Israel. Amos flatly delivered a terrifying personal prophecy directly to Amaziah to prove the supreme authority of the Almighty. He declared that Amaziah's family would ruin, his children would fall by the sword, and he himself would die in shame in a pagan country. That bloody judgment did not come from personal hatred, but was the inevitable consequence for daring to silence the messenger of truth to protect his seat of power. Amaziah chose silence in the face of truth, and in the end, he would embrace the eternal silence of doom. Amos's message is not just a distant historical story, but a chilling warning piercing through thousands of years to this very day. It exposes a terrifying truth that the Creator demands both worship and a righteous lifestyle in our every breath. When humans offer countless fattened sacrifices but casually trample on the rights of the weak, that worship becomes a disgusting crime. When we sing melodious hymns but our daily lives are filled with deceit and selfishness, the Almighty will plug his ears against those sounds. Justice is not something to practice only when convenient, and righteousness is not a cloak to perform in front of the crowd. It must be a mighty, roaring river, sweeping away all the filth of injustice and nourishing dry souls. Amos warned that material prosperity without righteousness in the soul is a highly dangerous, deadly trap. The kingdom of Israel at that time was filled with magnificent winter and summer villas decorated with expensive ivory. The wealthy casually lounged on luxurious beds, eating their fill of the choice lambs and drinking wine from giant bowls. They anointed themselves with the finest lotions but were completely indifferent to the moral collapse and suffering of their people. They blindly believed that wealth was clear proof of divine favor and absolute protection. But Amos shattered that foolish illusion by asserting that money cannot buy off the judgment of the righteous one. Great military strength would not protect them, and complex religious ceremonies would not save them from the looming wrath. The Creator measures the value of a nation not by economic indicators or glorious military victories. He measures by how they treat orphans, widows, and how they maintain truth in daily relationships. Before delivering the final verdict, the Almighty always patiently sends countless warnings to awaken His straying children. He had sent famine, prolonged drought, crop-destroying plagues, and painful military defeats. But after every horrific disaster, the kingdom of Israel stubbornly closed its eyes and ears, refusing to return to the path of light. The patience of the Creator is infinite, but justice demands a final boundary that cannot be crossed. Amos saw terrifying visions of the inevitable collapse of this sleeping kingdom. The first vision manifested before his eyes was a massive swarm of locusts devouring and stripping away all food sources in the fields. Amos wept and begged the Creator to forgive and have mercy on a small nation on the brink of starvation. The Almighty listened to the prayer of His loyal servant and decided to withdraw that data. The second vision showed a colossal fire from heaven consuming the deep ocean and swallowing fertile lands. Once again, Amos prostrated himself to beg for grace, and once again the Creator relented and stayed His hand of judgment. But by the third vision, all hope of intercession suddenly vanished in utter bewilderment. Amos saw the Almighty standing beside a solid wall, holding a cold plumb line in His hand. A plumb line is a blunt measuring tool used to check if a wall stands straight and secure. The Creator declared that He was setting a plumb line of truth right in the midst of Israel and would spare them no longer. The time for intercession and belated repentance had officially closed because their hearts had hardened like stone. The fourth vision showed a basket of ripe summer fruit, signaling that the end of Israel was very near and could not be delayed. The fifth vision was the most terrifying, showing the complete collapse of the Temple of Bethel from its strongest foundational pillars. The Almighty ordered to strike the pillars, making the thresholds shake violently and crushing the heads of all those trying to hide. No one can flee from the just judgment of the All-Knowing One, whether they hide in the depths of Sheol or climb to the heights of heaven. But our Creator is not a God who only knows destruction and extreme anger. Beyond the dark, gray clouds of judgment, the final words of the book of Amos burst with a breathtakingly brilliant hope. He promised that after the storm of cleansing, He would personally rebuild the fallen tent of David from long ago. He would heal bleeding wounds, rebuild ruined wastes, and restore its original glory. This is a messianic prophecy pointing to Jesus Christ, who would open the doors of the divine family to all nations across the earth. Beautiful days are coming when true prosperity will overflow the hills and valleys of the promised land. The harvest will be so abundant that the planter will not even step into the field before the reaper returns home with golden wheat. New wine will drip from the mountains, and once barren fields will transform into lush gardens of Eden. The nation of Israel will be replanted in their own sacred land and will never be uprooted again. This is the great news of the gospel, proving that the Creator's judgment always aims for full restoration and healing. History has proven the absolute accuracy of every prophecy uttered by the nameless shepherd Amos. Approximately 30 years later, the mighty Assyrian Empire swept down like a flood, devastating the northern kingdom of Israel. Luxurious ivory houses were leveled, and the proud wealthy were dragged away in chains as slaves in humiliation. The priests who once silenced the prophet of truth now fell silently under the brutal sword of the northern enemy. But the greatest legacy Amos left for humanity is not just an accurately fulfilled prophecy. It is a resounding answer to the question of whether the Creator can use an ordinary person like us. Amos proved that when the Almighty calls, humble origins or earthly degrees are no longer a barrier. He only needs a heart willing to step into danger to speak the truth and protect those who cannot protect themselves. All the issues Amos faced 28 centuries ago are still painfully present in our modern society today. Social injustice, endless greed, and religious rituals detached from love are still devastating this world daily. We must examine our own hearts to see if we are living selfishly in comfort while closing our eyes to the pain of others. Use your voice and small influence to stand for truth, justice, and compassion wherever you live. The time to repent and change your life is still wide open before the plumb line of judgment is laid down. The echo from the wilderness of Tekoa is still sounding through the dusty roads of history, challenging every beat of your heart. The Creator is speaking through an obedient life, and the only remaining question is whether you are listening.